I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked. You can't get ahead in your career unless you know how to deal with the unexpected. And Unlocked is here to help you do that because it's here to open possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you've got options from which to choose. Today, we have a great lineup. First of all, we're going to have Saleema Vellani, who's going to be joining us to talk about, we're going to talk about innovation and a few other things too. And then we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to play an earlier recorded conversation with Ed Hoffman. Many of you have seen him. He's the teacher of Navigating the Future of Work at Columbia and has been responsible for a lot of innovation at NASA. He's going to talk also about innovation. And finally, I'm going to share with you some of my secrets for creating the opportunity to do interesting and innovative work that I learned from a dancer. It's going to be all about a book that she wrote in my segment called Books of Impact. So as we prepare for Saleema to join me, let's take a very short break. Saleema, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to see and talk with you. You know, I have to tell the audience, you and I met in November. We were at a summit for women executives, and every speaker there was excellent, but you had a message that was so powerful. I said, I have to have Saleema on the show. So I'm delighted that we were able to manage to get you here. Let me tell the audience a little bit more specifics about you. Saleema Vellani is the CEO of Ripple Impact, an accelerator and community that helps entrepreneurs grow their businesses and platforms. She is also an innovation strategist at the World Bank Group, adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University. She's a contributor at Forbes and the author of Innovation Starts with I. I'm going to show you that book. It's a great book. We both have our copies. Good. And she's also on the board of the National Speakers Association in the DC chapter. So again, Saleema, welcome to Unlocked.
Thank you so much, Madeline.
You know, I always ask teenagers to help me write questions for my speakers. This first one comes from them. They said, out of the hundreds of people you interviewed for your book, who stands out? Can you tell us a story of one of those interviews and why it made such an impression?
Yeah, definitely. Wow. I interviewed lots of amazing people between Arianna Huffington, Alex Osterwalder, Doug Gallen, so many amazing leaders and innovators. I would say that my most memorable interview was Alex Osterwalder, who created the business model canvas, which many of you might be aware of if you're an entrepreneur in the startup space. The business model canvas is a very popular tool. And Alex Osterwalder, who is based in Switzerland, I reached out to him on his website and asked if I could interview him. And I ended up getting 30 minutes with him. I brought in a couple of my colleagues and did it at WeWork in 2019, right before the pandemic. And I learned a lot from him. I would say one of the biggest things I learned from him was the 80-20 rule. I asked him, so you facilitate all these workshops, your company facilitates all these different workshops that uses business model canvas and all his different tools. And he told me, first of all, he told me the importance of using visual tools to help people learn. And that way you can really appeal to different learning styles. And it also helps promote thought leadership. And that influenced me in the process of creating my book because I was stuck for so long and like, I need to have a thought leadership tool like business model canvas. And it was funny because he said that a lot of people end up using his business model canvas and iterating on it and creating more boxes and just making a different version of it. And I tried and I was like, no, Saleema, like, don't do that. And I was like, well, what can I use that's tested but simple and not complicated, but that will actually work? And it ended up putting me onto this journey where also influenced from another interview that I didn't have to create all my own tools. I could adapt or basically create a journey that helps transform people of tools that already exist, because a lot of the tools already exist out there. And so that really changed things for me. And I also learned from that interview the importance of the 80-20 rule, where he said that with his workshops and stuff, he basically, about 80% of them are standardized. And so it's a lot of similar content in it. He customizes about 20% of it. And so, the constant versus the variable. And I learned a lot from the way he thinks about things, about the 80-20. And I apply a lot of that in my current business and my workshops and the tools and templates and things I create is following that 80-20 rule. And I learned a lot from that interview.
Oh, sounds wonderful. And I love the fact that he introduced you to visuals, because your book has visuals in it. And I loved that about it, because you'd be talking about something pretty complex, and then suddenly there was a tool right there, and it was a picture. So great. Well, let's start by talking about innovation, because that's what your book is about. I know we can move on from there, because I know you're constantly evolving. But let's begin there. What are the factors that you see that really contribute to innovation?
Yeah, so great question. I think that innovation, well, my book is called Innovation Starts with I, and no pun intended, but yeah, it really starts at the human level. And a lot of times we think that, the iPhone is innovation, or this computer, this new tech gadget or devices is innovation. And when I say innovation starts with I go back to not only my own personal story, where this very house I'm in right now burned down, building out of fire back in 2015, and I had to rebuild and innovate my life. But it started with self-innovation. It really ignited transformation in me. That weekend my fire happened. I was actually at a life purpose workshop all weekend here in DC, someone else's house. So that was also very interesting, that it was a signal or something for me that was like, wow, Saleema, wake up. And it was transformation. Same with Steve Jobs. A lot of people are like, well, oh, Apple, a very innovative company. But where did it start? It started with a very deep level of rejection and self-actualization, and his own journey getting fired from Apple, the story of when he went to India and had, his own journey of transformation and personal growth. And when he came back to Apple, he was able to really innovate and share his vision and get other people to execute his vision. And that's where I think innovation starts. I think that it starts at the individual level, but it happens in collaboration with other people, with organizations and communities, and it impacts the world. And that's the fundamental, like, it's the foundation of my book.
I really appreciate that you view innovation much more broadly. You're right. It's not that technological change, which is what we tend to focus on. So many things. And, I'm thinking about the work that I do in resilience. You shouldn't fight having difficult moments. Yes, you have to fight to get through them, but don't think that life is going to be simple, because you never know what that huge lesson is going to be that comes through. And as you say, it really will innovate your whole life. Wow. Let's see. Your work is about, no, let's see. I don't want to go there. I want to come back to your book. It says that you landed on a path of entrepreneurship that forced you to reinvent yourself several times over. What did you learn in this process that helped you as you wrote your book, which also addresses the issues of becoming an entrepreneur? I'm really interested in talking a little bit about that entrepreneurial aspect.
Yeah. So for me, as I mentioned, innovation starts with I. Reinvention is at the core of it. I think that I really resonate with what James Clear says around entrepreneurship really being about self-transformation and innovating oneself. Those are not his exact words, but how I would perceive his words. But it's disguised as a business pursuit. So a lot of people think, oh, entrepreneurship, find a problem to solve, start a business. Very different. Being a business owner, starting a business is very different than being an entrepreneur or being a startup founder. Entrepreneurship is really about innovating with oneself, being able to reinvent myself in order to reinvent other people, and through, reinventing my business and reinventing the world. And so it's really about personal transformation. And when you go through that personal transformation, you can truly innovate and create something, and you grow through that journey. And a lot of people do it temporarily. Like it's been very trendy or popular to become an entrepreneur. And now it's not so much, let's start a unicorn company in my parents' garage and starve ourselves. It's more about, how do I build something that's going to be sustainable for the lifestyle that I want without burning out, which uses my skills and my expertise, which is why I created Ripple Impact, was to help these entrepreneurs, which are really more, we use more of the language like thought leaders and service-based, expert entrepreneurs who are building a business around their expertise, who are trying to future-proof themselves or prepare for a future corporate exit, or trying to innovate while they're in transition, because the world is all about transitions these days. We're constantly reinventing ourselves, and it's just the norm, just the way the world is changing, that we're also changing. Whether, I don't know which one comes first, but all I know is that things are changing very quickly. We've seen so much change in the last 20 years, and that continues to happen as you see people now rippling and changing constantly. And I think entrepreneurship it needs to be redefined or change the definition of it, since it's not so much just setting up a business to solve a problem or bring an idea that's going to change things. It's really starts with self-change.
I think for me, that's a new dimension to entrepreneurship. I grew up in a time when entrepreneurship meant that you went into business, and it had to do with building a business. I love the fact that you've added to it that it's now really in a way, you're building yourself to do this new thing. Yeah. And it, even if you turn that word entrepreneur into intrapreneur, which is often used when you're inside an organization, it's still the same thing.
Yep, very much so. And I think that's where I also did a lot of research for my book. Was I was trying to study, I was interviewing a lot of corporate leaders and a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm like, why are all these entrepreneurs failing? Why do people want to set up and they're not really contributing to the economy because their business isn't doing too well, and they're burning themselves out as founders trying to run a business, but maybe it wasn't the dream that they thought it would be like to be an entrepreneur. And then many companies had really high attrition rates where people didn't want to stay in a job like the old days for a very long period of time. And I'm like, that's also a big loss and the turnover to the economy. And being an economist, or at least, having studied economics and worked in economic development for many years, I realized that why is there this problem? There's a big loss of efficiency, a big loss of productivity. There's people wanting to do something, companies wanting to make change and solve problems too. And yet the people within them, they're not really motivating or helping them unleash their entrepreneurial spirit. And so I was like, why do we have to pick one? Why can't we be an entrepreneur within an organization, or why can't we be an entrepreneur that collaborates with companies? So, yeah.
I was just reading a report from, I think it was McKinsey, and they did a survey of Gen Zers. And one of the things that really drives them to stay in a place is that the work life is suitable to them. What drives them or tempts them away is an elevation in their career, to move up. But there's this enormous desire to make sure that their life remains within some certain boundaries of lifestyle, including being committed to the goal and mission of whatever they're working on. So this is consistent with what you're talking about.
Yeah, very much so. And what do you see as like the trends compared to when you were growing up and when you were in your 30s and 40s?
Well, in those times, I was so concerned about making sure I had a voice at the table, because oftentimes I was the only woman at the table. And so that was a keen need of mine, or yes, it was a need to have my voice heard. I think another was that you wanted to gauge your progress by where you ended up in your career. So you were constantly looking for how do I enlarge what I do? How do I elevate what I do? Can I get promotions? That was a lot of the attention that you paid. I can't say that it was salary, only because I wasn't raised to be motivated by money. I hate to admit that, but it's true. So that never was a driver. but being able to do more and more challenging work was really important when I was growing up. Yeah. Well, let's come back to the name of your company. I loved the word ripple, because it just sets up such a beautiful image in my mind. How did you come upon that title?
Yeah, Ripple Impact. So interestingly, I had interviewed one of my first interviewees, and I only realized much later, more recently, that maybe that was an influence. I interviewed Doug Gallen, who's the founder of RippleWorks, and his company, it's basically a nonprofit. They help mentor. They bring like Silicon Valley mentors and mentors from that have been successful or scale up companies, and connect them with social entrepreneurs in emerging market countries. And so I thought that was phenomenal. It's like, oh, I love the fact that he's connecting that, where there's a gap, where there's a lot of entrepreneurs who have great ideas and they just don't have the resources or the mentorship to be able to take their ideas to transform their countries and their communities. And I was so fascinated. In fact, he was my first interview out of the 99 that came later. And the first of the 100 Coffee Challenge. And it really inspired me to get the book going as well. This was end of 2018 at the World Bank Group when he came to speak. And I interviewed him shortly after his keynote. And then I also saw in 2017, I saw Leila Jana at the House of Beautiful Business conference in Lisbon, which I also just returned from right now in Portugal. Happens every year, usually in Portugal. And Leila Jana, well, she's late now. She passed away in early 2020. But her company, Samasource, was doing something similar, but a little bit more sleeves rolled up, was connecting people that are less privileged in developing countries with contracts that she would get with like Microsoft and bigger corporations here, tech companies essentially, that needed data entry type work. And she built a school called Sama School and would help build their digital skills. And instead of giving aid, she was all about, let's not give aid, let's give work. Let's build their skills and give them work and help them actually make money and get out of poverty. And I thought that was phenomenal. I went to see her in Lisbon. I saw her in Boston at Inbound during her book launch, and she was great. Before she passed away, she had a great community, and I love the way that she innovated as a social entrepreneur. And I ended up getting inspired to do something similar around connecting emerging market talent with entrepreneurs wherever in the world that need help to take their ideas off the ground. And usually building a team yourself is very time consuming. It's very hard as an entrepreneur. You're scrappy. You're trying to piecemeal talent together, coaches from here, designers from Upwork, and marketers from all over the place. And you're just trying to piecemeal it all together. You end up task managing and you're burning out because none of the pieces are really connecting, and they're all very interested in getting their scope of work done and ticking their box, but they're not necessarily working alongside with you as a partner in your business, and they're not working together, collaborating. And I was like, well, I tried teaching people in the earlier days of Ripple Impact, before Ripple Impact was born, was maybe I can do what I did with Upwork many years before when I started writing the book back in 2014, was like, oh, I can teach entrepreneurs. I used to work at a WeWork and had a partnership with WeWork and teach entrepreneurs how to build remote teams. Pandemic hit, light bulb switched on. I'm like, oh, perfect timing from this. Got laid off in 2015, but maybe this is the time. The time is ripe. I tried teaching entrepreneurs how to build remote teams. I tried telling my friends, go hire these virtual assistants from these different agencies. And it wasn't necessarily working because strategy and execution were not aligning. And so I said, well, maybe we need to become the team. I love being a consultant. I love advising. I love coaching. I love strategy. But rolling our sleeves up to do creative and marketing, copywriting, all of that was very risky for me. I'm like, oh, like there's a lot of quality control needed for that. And like, how am I going to scale that? And so when Ripple Impact was born, it was really about testing the execution piece of that. So it was like, okay, well, I know strategy. If I can relay strategy and share my vision with the team and build a team of leaders and strategists and coaches, and take me and break it into different people and components where they are better at me than the things that I can do, like, marketing, branding, design, et cetera, creative thought leadership. And I started to find people that were better at me in different areas, and also an execution team of marketers and copywriters and lead generation specialists. And we ended up becoming the team to many entrepreneurs. And that's when Ripple Impact was born. We started in a beta mode in 2020. And I would say it was probably like 2021, 2022 that we really came to become where we are now. We're still evolving, we're still revamping and constantly changing, but it's beautiful that we are like a ripple in the sense that we are making an impact that has, we have internally many entrepreneurial minded people that work with us, and it very much feels like a family where we are working towards the mission of helping many entrepreneurs, but they are also very entrepreneurial themselves and learning how to start a business and grow their platforms and their brands and their audience in the meantime. While we help our clients who are these entrepreneurs, we're helping them spread their impact. And that's where the ripple piece comes, where we're helping, it's like a ripple effect of sorts. We call it ripple impact, but the people that we work with are all striving to make an impact in a very creative way with their thought leadership, their message, their story, and their business. And so, yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
One of the things that comes out of it is a reflection of what you said earlier about, I can't remember the woman's name, where instead of teaching people, she actually got work for them. Because what I'm hearing you say and what she was doing was helping people learn in context of the work. So it's not learning concepts, it's not learning pieces of things, it's actually seeing it applied.
Mm-hmm. And I think instead of us teaching the skills to the entrepreneurs that are trying to make an impact, we're bringing them the skills at a very affordable price, where instead of trying to hire those resources and manage that on their own, they're getting a whole team at the fraction of a cost of what they would pay for one full-time person. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, you talk about 12 future-proof capabilities. I don't think you can probably talk about all 12, but let's talk about a few of those, because you're right. This is a time when the world is changing, and it's changing more and more rapidly with many, many factors that we're beginning to understand how complex life is. Why don't you talk about some of those and what that means?
Sure. Thank you. So I would say the one that comes to mind right now is originality. I think that one is important because as we grow and as we build our platforms, especially if you're an entrepreneur or you're a founder, you're a thought leader, or trying to get your message or story out, I would say that trying to be non-obvious and in your messaging is important. And that, there's so many people, it's very hard to stand out today, especially when we're getting ourselves out there, we're marketing, we're trying to tell our stories, we're trying to be known for something. You have to find a way to be non-obvious. What is the thing that you do that's different than everyone else? And a lot of people try to figure out what problem they can solve that's unique. And I think it's what Guy Kawasaki says, is start with yourself. Like, a good idea is not just trying to figure out what's good for the market. It starts with knowing yourself, and it has to align with yourself and who you are authentically. And so I love the concept of originality, because I don't think we need to be original. I think that it is a word that you could more easily create original things a century ago, but now there's so many things that already exist. Your ideas that you might think are original, you Google and you'll probably find that they already exist. There's other like somewhere else in the world. And so I think it's about being non-obvious, and it's about what Seth Godin says is he says, I have no new ideas. I only have combinations. I only have original combinations of existing ideas, something like that, he said. And I love that, because it's about original combinations. And as we wear different hats in the world, is what I say in my book, calls hybridpreneurs. If you are a person that wears different hats, especially if you're like a speaker, an author, consulting, doing many things, a lot of us have multiple interests, many careers, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's not about, a lot of us are like, oh, I've changed my career too many times. I'm like, no, look at it as a benefit. I've reinvented myself so many times, and it's this original combination, which didn't make so much sense when I was going through the process and I was switching all the time. But then now what I'm doing, it has led to a merge of all those different hats that I've worn over the years, with the international development background, having the team in the emerging markets, with the marketing background, having led a marketing agency and also failed at it before. I've built in a bit of the economics background that I have. If you look at my book, a lot of those 2x2 grids are coming from my economic background. I've built in, my love for writing. I've built in my creative element. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different, and I was never a really good designer, but I have an eye for it. And so it's interesting that I've been able to communicate my vision and build something that merges all the different things, whether I loved it and wasn't good at it, or I was somewhat good at it but couldn't scale and be an expert at it, and the things that I am really good at, but yeah, just needed to put it along with something else to make it impactful. So
The other day, I was speaking with a group in somewhere on the West Coast. Uh, when you go virtual, you don't always know. You just know their time zone. And it's a group called Mom Relaunch. And I was thinking, as you said, about bringing everything from your background, because many women stop and pause to have children, and then they come back into the workforce, and they neglect to realize they still have all of the original skills, and they have all of the new skills and capabilities that they learned just being a parent. So we talked about that a bit in the session, to help them understand they have a great deal to bring back to the workforce, because they're all about coming back to the workforce.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I agree with you. You don't drop anything. I started my career in mathematics. I would never drop mathematics, but nobody would ever say that Madeline's a mathematician. You just bring what works. Yeah. Okay. Another future-proof capability.
Yeah, I would say that, whoops, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Another future-proof capability I would say is, there's a lot of them. There's 12. I talked about originality. I would have to say the other one is probably curiosity. I think that one is very important. I talk a lot
love
about
that one.
I talk a lot about the story of how I got involved right after this house fire. I came back to Washington, D.C. after getting denied entry to the United States. And I ended up doing some very fulfilling work. I'll tell you about it in a second. But I came back for 2 weeks because I got denied entry in Camp Canadian, got denied entry. I finally got allowed. I was allowed to come in for 2 weeks into the country after, this is my home. This is where I had lived for several years. And yet, because I didn't have nationality here, I had no rights to be in the country. And so when the immigration officer let me in, this is in chapter 2 of my book, when I was let in for 2 weeks, I said, well, there's only 2 places I can not easily, but somewhat easily get a job if I worked really hard at it. And so I went out and had 8 to 10 coffees a day over the course of 2 weeks. I slept at different people's houses in DC because this place that I live in was inaccessible. It was under repairs from the fire. And I literally went out from like 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. every day to go have coffee with different people. I went from different international development banks. I went to different cafes around downtown. I was probably on a lot of caffeine. I didn't sleep very much, but I was very determined to find a job. I don't like failing, and I will work as hard as it takes to not fail. And so I ended up, towards the end of the 2 weeks, I ended up finding an opportunity through one of my coffees with a former colleague of mine who ended up helping me get a job or a consultancy at the World Bank to help figure out how do we solve the food insecurity problem for refugees in the Middle East and North Africa. And she asked me to look at different solutions that were not traditional agriculture. So, for example, aeroponics, aquaponics. I eventually looked at insect farming and different ways to grow food without using soil, using very little water, and not planting into the land, into the ground. And so that was a challenge. I did a lot of desk review, but I used a lot of curiosity to, first of all, find the job through the 2-week challenge, the 100 coffee challenge that I had. But also the job entailed, figuring out a solution that I had never worked in agriculture or with refugees. I was displaced, so I could relate a bit to not having a home, but not at the level of, refugees. And so for me, it was like, wow, how am I going to solve this? And I spent a lot of time doing research, creating a database. And eventually, several months later, we got to travel to the Middle East and North Africa and visited refugee camps and Israel and places where they're really innovating with soil-less farming. And so that was very cool. And lots of light bulbs went on and a lot of success happened. And actually, thanks to that project, I ended up getting a green card a lot thanks to that project, because we won an award and it was very innovative what we did. And it continued into insect farming and other things that are continuing to be implemented.
I really appreciate your aspect of curiosity, because when you were thinking about what the second thing was, I kept thinking in my mind, learning. My God, that's key to the future. And of course, curiosity leads you to learn. And it's, in fact, to me, it's curiosity opens the door to learning. You don't learn until you really want to learn. And curiosity really gives you that push. And I love the fact that you also didn't just say, oh, I'm curious about this. You really pushed to find what answers to your questions. It's great. Well, and I suggest to people when they're working on their resilience to take time to remember the stories of their own life and write them down so they can use them as mirrors. I call them look into the mirror for what formed you. And when I read that relationships are mirrors in your book, I was ecstatic, because if our eyes are open, we can actually see what the other person is seeing in us. We can ask questions or whatever. I'm curious as to your thoughts on this and this aspect of asking and listening and reflecting, which you just gave a great story of.
Yeah. So I think that in my book, I talk about there's different levels of listening. And I'll admit, I'm great with asking questions. I have a lot of curiosity. I'm constantly ideating. I'm a visionary, so I'm constantly coming up with new ideas, but I'm not a great listener. And so generally what happens is when I have all these questions and people start answering, and then I'm like already thinking about the next thing to ask, and my brain is just running at the speed of lightning. And so I think that in my book, I tried studying different types of listening, and I included and admitted that I'm not a great listener, but essentially that there are different types of listening. And I think that curiosity really gets ignited. It gets ignited when we're listening in a collaborative way or an intuitive way, and not so much at the surface level, like we're trying to hear. Generally, we're just able to repeat back something or absorb it. But generally, if you want to truly innovate or use curiosity, I would say listening at a level where you can feel what the other person is saying and empathize with them. And empathy is another future-proof capability in my book. So, yeah.
Oh, gosh. Empathize with them. That's, I find it sometimes I get so empathetic that I have to stop reading the newspaper, because I would check myself and discover that I'm weeping as I'm reading a story of particularly refugees. So I say, okay, I have to stop now. I have to get back to work. But it is an important skill. And once you have that, yes, you're reading a newspaper that you're not interacting, but if you're with a person, it makes a big difference when they sense that you have connected with them at that empathetic level. Because I think we perceived a great deal more of what's happening between us than we're able even to articulate as human beings. So, all right. Well, that's two. Well, actually, we've talked about three really dynamic, future-proof capabilities there. Before we started this interview, you said there were a couple of other areas that you were interested in talking about. Remind me of what those were, and let's weave them into what we're saying, because you have so much to offer.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that one of the things that I've been learning a lot about that I've not written about too much because I'm still going through is leadership. And I'm writing a lot of notes as I go through the motions and learn lessons through different failures or decisions I did not make or bad decisions I made as a leader. And it's funny because I used to teach a lot of leadership development and on stuff like empathy and all these different skills. And I know how to teach. I know them because I've studied a lot of them, but applying them is very different. And application, and I'm at Stanford doing executive education and leadership, and Stanford Lead, and I'm learning a lot theoretical stuff in groups and teams. But it was only when I got an executive coach that I realized where I'm not practicing or applying a lot of my learnings. And I think that has been extremely helpful, is having a fractional COO who comes in 3 days a week to work for us and coach me and coach our leaders on how to become more efficient, how to work and collaborate more closely together. And the application piece I didn't realize was missing most of my career. And I'm a forever student, so I read a lot of books. I learn a lot of things. I'm in a bunch of programs, but going through the journey of leadership has been quite challenging. And I think that there's a lot that I'm still learning in that journey. I know that you've learned a lot yourself in that journey, and
Well, amen to that.
several of your listeners also. And I'm curious to hear from you, actually. Madeline, what are some of your biggest lessons in leadership that you would like to share?
I think one of the biggest lessons was that you do not have, as the leader, you do not have all the answers, nor do you have to have them. People don't even demand that of you. What they demand of you is that you listen to them, because they, as a group, should have together what it takes to solve the problem. That's hard when you're young, because when you're young, you're trying to prove yourself, and you get into that habit of feeling like you have to have the answers to the problems. And eventually you get to the point where you realize that your staff have enormous capacity, enormous learning, and you can sit back and say, this is the issue. Let's solve it together. And I think that's the big lesson that you learn. And it when you get to that point, it's amazing. Your career takes a leap. I mean, it's not a steady. All of a sudden, you go up a step function. You know about step functions, I know.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting journey, and there's different levels of it. And I think as you go through that, there's a lot of personal growth and unleashing that's required. And as someone that has been an individual contributor most of my career, it's definitely quite challenging, but it's also quite fulfilling to know how much impact and influence I can have on people if I step into my leadership style and really embrace the leader within myself. I would say I've learned a lot, and I'm in that journey as well. And that's probably where I would write my next book is, what we're really good at is helping people get started or reposition themselves or take their idea, go into starting a business. And going from 0 to 500 is one thing, but going from 500 to a million is another. And then going beyond a million is another step. And so there's a lot of different levels there of leadership and growth that needs to be embraced, and having the right community, the right support system, the right team, the right mentorship, the right education, all of that is very key. And that's something that I'm constantly learning every day.
Definitely. In fact, what I want to ask you is, okay, what's an area that you're working on, a specific area that you're working on?
I would say how to truly convey my vision as the visionary to the rest of the team. I think that it can be very hard as we step into leaders to share our how or our secrets. I think if we're very skilled at, for example, you're very skilled at sales, you're very skilled at design, you're very skilled at customer success, how do you actually teach other people your craft or teach them to do it either as good as you or better than you, ideally better than you. If you did well if you've trained someone to be better than you. That's fulfilling to me. And I think for me, I think that's what I'm learning about, is how to stand up or scale different departments within the company when it used to be individuals, and we've grown into departments, and making sure that we're ready for scale when we go through our next phase of growth. And so that's one of the things I'm working on. And I didn't see myself doing all of this just a few years ago. I didn't imagine growing this big. I always thought of being much smaller and more boutique. But I see that this is how we're making our impact, and there's the demand. So let's serve as many people as possible and set up the systems and the team to be able to do that and really make an impact. And it's quite fulfilling, but it's also really hard.
Yes. Yes. Are there any exercises or methods that you would recommend for an individual to say, okay, I really have got to change my life? What would you recommend? Not to have your house burned out, but.
Yeah. So in this process, I'm in my next self-innovation phase of Saleema 4.0. I would say that there's some great tools in my book. I would say reading chapter 3, there's lots of great tools on finding your sweet spot. In fact, just the first section of my book, the first 4 chapters are very focused on the individual. And I would say the 100 Coffee Challenge is a great way to do that work because there's only so much we can look within ourselves. I think it's great to have help on teasing things out of us, having a coach or having a community or support system. You could do what I did, which is go to India and Thailand and Bali and do an eat, pray, self-love trip and do Ayurveda and meditation and go to ashrams and spend a lot of time alone, explore new places, go into nature. But I found the most value actually when I combined that with going out into my 100 Coffee Challenge because I was under constraints and I learned a lot about myself and how people saw me and my value and my skills through the lens of other people. So it was elevating my definition of self-awareness, which for me was just looking within myself. I learned a lot as other people were finding me in a way that I didn't know myself. So I think that as we go about self-innovation or someone wants to, figure out who they're becoming, it's important to talk to other people, spend time alone, do self-care, and what I call active introspection, where you're going out and getting feedback from people, learning about your strengths, your skills, finding your sweet spot. What are the things that you're really good at, that you're good at? What are the things people say you're good at? What are the things that you secretly know that you really love or you really want to look at and do? And then what are some of the ideas that you've had on the back burner? Because sometimes it's those ideas when we wake up in the middle of the night or we're going out for a walk in the rain and they come to us. It's those ideas that we sometimes hush and tell ourselves to be quiet. It's those ideas that sometimes are the ones that we need to unleash.
Absolutely. Well, I love your phrase, the 100 Coffee Challenge, because I think sometimes when we force ourselves into some constraints, we can become very creative. There seems to be a relationship between those two. Saleema, I want to thank you. This has been such a rich conversation. I wonder if you have any closing comments for our listeners.
Yeah, sure. I would say that as we go into this unknown future, now we're pretty much getting used to the uncertainty and living in not knowing what's going to come to us. But we've been through a lot over the pandemic. And I think one thing that many of us have learned is the importance of future-proofing yourself. And when I say that, you could never fully future-proof yourself, but what you can do is be more proactive about your reinvention process. So whether you are in a corporate job and you're looking to make an exit and you're not sure how, or you're like maybe feeling some itch inside of you to prepare for doing something more purposeful, whether you want to be more creative and do something outside of your job or your business, or align with your business and your job, whether it's starting a podcast, a show, or writing a book, or a 100 Coffee Challenge, whatever it is that can help bring out your creativity, go ahead and do that. And it can be a small project. It doesn't have to be starting a business. It doesn't have to be starting something super long-term or big. It should be realistic, something that you can take from beginning to completion. And I think it's those projects, when we do some of these projects, can really help us discover ourselves. And I would say really thinking about who you want to be, who you want to show up as, and building what you need, whether it's the platform, the audience, the brand, the business. Write a book in a way that's going to accelerate you into that future version of yourself. A lot of us are so focused on our past and our present, and we should be present, but I also think we should be thinking about where we want to be, because every step we take right now is going to be a step towards where we want to be in our future. I think the more we wait and not make things happen, we'll look back, and time is the one asset that we share with everyone that's super successful. And I think that that's the one thing we cannot get back is time. So how are you using your time, and how can you use it better?
Fantastic. Saleema, thank you so much. I am so appreciative of your time, your expertise, and your willingness to spend this time with us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
You are so welcome. Oh, gosh. It's always wonderful to talk to someone who is in the midst of change, even though she's wildly successful. She recognizes that constant change and the need to evolve yourself. That was exciting. You know, as the creator of Navigating the Future of Work at Columbia University, Ed Hoffman's ideas about innovation could not be more relevant. I asked Ed how he defined it and what was critical to the organization to support it. This from a conversation we had before. This is Ed's answer.
Because innovation is more important than it's ever been. And for the future, it's going to be even more important. Innovation basically is the need to do things differently, right? To find things differently. Some people will say it's not just the creative part, but it's also the ability to embed it, to sustain it. And in a world that's changing, in our world that's changing, then innovation becomes vital. And so it becomes important of how to do that. Fundamentally, I think a couple of things. One is you have to lower the risk of a failure, or you have to be comfortable. You have to give me permission that, yes, you can do this, you can try new things, and you're okay with that. I think the other aspect of it is you have to have the resources, whatever those are. It could be talent, could be different, diverse perspectives. It could be a certain amount of funding. You have to have the autonomy, I think, the freedom to be able to try new things, to experiment. But to me, those are the three things that when innovation has worked or when I've seen it, they're always in place. That ability to experiment, the ability to feel safe, and understanding the risks or the potential failure outcomes of when things go wrong. I think it's important that nothing is free, right? There's always trade-offs. Project managers don't like innovation because innovation will increase the likelihood of a risk. And many of the things you do in a project is to reduce that risk profile. When I was working at NASA, I had many leaders I love working with. The team had a great idea, something I thought was exciting, but it was different. It was new, something that hadn't been done other places. And I remember going to different people, whether it was Chris Scalise or Rex Jeviden or different folks. And one of the things I heard from all these different individuals was, what's the worst thing that'll happen if this doesn't work, if it fails?
Yeah. Yes.
And if I could tell them it's not going to get them or the administration in trouble, it's not going to be a Washington Post kind of a thing, then in most cases they'd say, okay, give it a shot and see how it goes. So that gives you a permission because you understand the boundaries. It opens up the door for, we're going to try something new. It may not succeed. Oftentimes, when you try something, it doesn't go exactly as planned, but you have permission to move forward.
Oftentimes my clients would invite me to work with them because they knew I would not hesitate to bring something innovative to the issue at hand. I appreciated that Ed began with not what is innovation, but why. He said 3 things are needed. One of them is resources to experiment: talent, funds, knowledge, expertise, diverse perspectives, time. I also promised to tell you about the secret of innovation that I learned from a dancer. It has to do with resources. I tended to look principally at the project's budget when I began, because I wanted to make sure I had enough funds and resources to bring in the particular knowledge and expertise on the team. And I needed resources, obviously, to pay for them. But the dancer expanded how I look at resources, obtain them, and use them. The book of impact that I'm going to talk about today is called The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp. Twyla Tharp is a dancer and choreographer. And her book describes how she creates new dances. I read this book cover to cover, and I don't read all books cover to cover. In this book, she says when she gets an idea for a dance, she gives it a name, and I love her names. One of her dances is called 8 Jelly Rolls. Anyway, she will write the name down on a piece of paper, and she'll put it into a box, and that box is a real box. She may then go into the studio, turn on the camera, do some movements that kind of come to her mind as she thinks about that name, and she'll take that file and she'll put it in the box. And over time, while she's doing other things, she may come upon a piece of music that she particularly likes. She'll put the CD in the box. Maybe she'll read an article in the newspaper. That reminds me. And she'll put that into the box. Maybe it's a piece of fabric or a color, and she'll put that into the box. The interesting thing that she says is that when that box says it's time, she opens the box and she says that the quality of her work is in direct proportion to the care that she's taken of filling that box. She says in her book, so the box is not a substitute for creating. The box doesn't compose or write a poem or create a dance step. The box is the raw index of your preparation. It is the repository of your creative potential. I've never forgotten that phrase, the repository of your creative potential. When Saleema was talking about going out on her 100 coffee challenge, she was building and she was filling up her box so that she would have a repository of creative potential when she finally was able to move on things. What that meant to me was that when I need to innovate, I must first take time to understand the environment, the background of the situation or the idea. It's easy to think that innovation drops from the sky, but in fact, it comes from reflecting on the broader situation, letting our amazing brains think quietly on this and start coming up with options. Because it will, if you give it a chance, if you will just listen to what's called the deferred network in your brain that's active all the time, except this executive function up here is so noisy, we don't always hear it. Those who have worked with me know that I stress taking time in silence. Those are the times we give permission for that creative part of our mind to have their voice heard. After you've gathered what you know, then give time for reflection, allowing ideas to formulate. Now, for me, that was the secret to prepare the ground for innovation. The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp. If you're curious about the background of this show, check out my book, Unlocked. It's available in Kindle, audio, or paperback. And if you'd like to explore what it means to build and nurture your resilience with me as your mentor, send me an email, madeline@madelineblair.com, and I will get right back to you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Unlocked. And if you did, make a comment in social media. Say what you learned and what you might do differently. And if you're on YouTube, click the like button, or better yet, subscribe. Be sure to check out the replays available on my website as well. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.